The morning sun filtered through the large windows of the Thompson family home, casting golden streaks across the polished wooden floors. Marcus Thompson sat at the dining table, sipping his coffee while scanning the headlines on his tablet. As the U.S. Attorney General, mornings like these were rare, a quiet moment to gather his thoughts before diving into another hectic day filled with meetings, policy discussions, and decisions that would shape the nation's legal landscape. Across the table, Layla, his 16-year-old daughter, was busy finishing her breakfast. With curly hair tied back in a ponytail and a bright smile lighting up her face, she exuded confidence and energy. She had inherited her father's sharp mind, but also her mother Elena's warmth and charm. Today, however, there was an air of nervousness about her. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her napkin as she glanced toward the clock every few seconds. "What's got you so worked up?" Marcus asked, setting down his tablet. He leaned forward slightly, studying his daughter with a mix of curiosity and concern. Layla hesitated for a moment before answering. "I have court today," she said finally, her voice tinged with both apprehension and determination. "For the speeding ticket." Marcus nodded slowly. He remembered the incident well. It had happened just 2 weeks ago. Layla had been driving home from a friend's house when a police officer pulled her over for allegedly going 10 miles over the speed limit. While it wasn't a major offense, especially since it was her first time behind the wheel, Marcus had expected her to simply pay the fine and move on. But Layla had surprised him by deciding to contest the ticket instead. "Why? Are you fighting it?" he had asked her one evening after dinner. They were sitting together in the living room, the soft hum of the television providing background noise. "Because I don't think I was speeding," Layla replied firmly. "And even if I was, I want to understand why this happened. Was I really going too fast, or did they stop me because of how I look?" Her words had struck a chord with Marcus. He knew all too well the complexities of racial bias in law enforcement. Though he wanted to shield his children from such realities, he couldn't deny the importance of standing up for oneself when faced with injustice, even if it came in the form of a minor traffic violation. Now, watching Layla prepare for her court appearance, Marcus felt a swell of pride mixed with unease. On one hand, he admired her courage and desire to seek clarity. On the other hand, he worried about what might happen once she stepped into the courtroom. The justice system, despite its ideals, wasn't always fair or kind, especially not to young black individuals like Layla. Elena entered the kitchen then, breaking the silence. She carried herself with grace, her presence instantly calming the room. She placed a hand on Layla's shoulder and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "You'll do great, sweetheart," she said softly. "Just remember to stay calm and speak clearly." Layla nodded, though her knuckles turned white as she gripped the strap of her bag tighter. "I'm not scared," she muttered under her breath. I don't want anyone to think I'm making excuses." Marcus exchanged a glance with Elena, silently communicating their shared concern. They both knew that Layla's decision to fight the ticket wasn't about avoiding responsibility. It was about asserting her rights and ensuring that her voice was heard. Still, the thought of sending their daughter into a potentially hostile environment weighed heavily on them. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the house grew tense. Layla checked her outfit one last time in the mirror. Neat jeans, a crisp blouse, and simple flats. She wanted to appear respectful yet confident, someone who deserved to be taken seriously. Marcus offered a few final pieces of advice. Maintain eye contact, avoid interrupting the judge, and always address him or her formally. By the time they reached the car, Layla seemed more composed, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the rearview mirror. Elena slid into the passenger seat beside her, offering words of encouragement along the way. Marcus, meanwhile, stayed behind to attend an urgent meeting in Washington, D.C., promising to call later to check in. The drive to the courthouse was uneventful, but Layla's mind raced with possibilities. Would the judge listen to her side of the story? Would the officer who issued the ticket show up? And most importantly, would she be treated fairly? When they arrived, the courthouse loomed before them, its towering columns and imposing facade reminding Layla of the weight of the institution she was about to enter. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, squared her shoulders, and followed her mother inside. Little did she know, this ordinary trip to court would soon spiral into something far beyond anything she or her parents could have anticipated. The courthouse buzzed with activity as Layla and her mother, Elena, made their way through the heavy wooden doors. The air was thick with the scent of polished floors and faint traces of stale coffee. People milled about in the lobby, some clutching folders filled with papers, others nervously pacing or whispering to companions. Layla's heart raced as she took in the scene. It felt surreal to be part of something so formal, almost like stepping into a movie set where everyone had a role except her. Elena guided Layla toward the courtroom assigned for her hearing. "Just stay calm," she whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You've got this." Layla nodded but couldn't shake the knot forming in her stomach. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was only 9:15 a.m., yet the hallway already felt suffocating. The benches lining the walls were crowded with other defendants waiting for their cases to be called. Some looked anxious while others seemed indifferent, scrolling through their phones or chatting loudly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a bailiff appeared at the entrance of the courtroom and announced that Judge Howard Greaves was ready to begin proceedings. Layla's name wasn't among the first few called, which gave her more time to rehearse what she planned to say. She repeated key points under her breath. "I wasn't speeding. I deserve answers. This is about fairness." As case after case unfolded inside the courtroom, Layla observed how Judge Greaves conducted himself. He was a tall man with sharp features, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. His voice carried authority, cutting through the room like a blade. To Layla, he seemed intimidating, not just because of his position, but also because of the way he barked orders and interrupted people mid-sentence. Several times, she noticed him rolling his eyes or sighing audibly when someone struggled to articulate their defense. Each instance made her grip the edge of her seat tighter. When her name was finally called, Layla Thompson, case number 4721, she stood up quickly, smoothing her blouse one last time before walking toward the front. Her footsteps echoed against the tiled floor, drawing the attention of everyone present. Elena stayed seated near the back, watching intently as her daughter approached the podium. "State your case," Judge Greaves said curtly, barely looking up from the papers in front of him. His tone was dismissive, almost bored, as if he'd already decided the outcome before hearing a word. Layla cleared her throat and began speaking. "Your Honor, I believe the ticket I received was issued unfairly. I wasn't speeding, and I'd like to understand why." Before she could finish her sentence, Judge Greaves cut her off. "Young lady, are you aware that officers have radar guns? They don't pull people over based on guesses." His words stung, but Layla forced herself to remain composed. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand that, but I genuinely feel there may have been a mistake." Again, the judge interrupted. "Do you think police officers make mistakes often?" His tone had shifted now, dripping with sarcasm. "Or do you believe they're out here targeting innocent drivers?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some spectators exchanged glances, sensing the tension building between the teenager and the judge. Layla swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "I'm not saying that, Your Honor. I just want to explain my side." "Young lady," Judge Greaves snapped, leaning forward in his chair, "you're wasting this court's time. Do you know how many cases we have to get through today? How many real issues need resolving?" Layla froze, her mind scrambling for the right response. She hadn't expected this level of hostility. All she wanted was a chance to tell her story, to ensure that her perspective was acknowledged. Instead, she felt like she was being dismissed without even being heard. And then it happened. Without warning, Judge Greaves slammed his gavel down onto the desk with such force that the sound reverberated through the room. Before anyone could react, he leaned sideways and delivered a sharp slap across Layla's face. The crack of his palm meeting her cheek echoed louder than the gavel strike, leaving the entire courtroom stunned into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Layla staggered backward, her hand instinctively flying to her burning cheek. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let the judge see her cry. Her mind reeled. Had that really just happened? Had a judge, someone, sworn to uphold justice, physically assaulted her in open court? Elena shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage. "How dare you!" she shouted, pointing accusingly at Judge Greaves. "She's a child. What kind of monster are you?" Security guards rushed forward, attempting to restrain Elena and prevent her from approaching the bench. Layla, still reeling from the shock, stood frozen in place, unable to process what had just occurred. Around her, murmurs erupted into outright gasps and cries of disbelief. Spectators who had been quietly observing moments earlier were now visibly outraged, some shaking their heads in disgust while others pulled out their phones to capture the chaos. Unbeknownst to Judge Greaves, several security cameras mounted high on the walls had recorded the entire incident. Within minutes, footage of the slap began circulating online, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. Hashtags like #JusticeForLayla and #JudicialAbuse started trending, drawing attention from news outlets and activists nationwide. Back in the courtroom, Judge Greaves seemed oblivious to the storm brewing outside. He straightened his tie and adjusted his robes, acting as though nothing unusual had transpired. With a wave of his hand, he instructed the bailiff to escort Layla and Elena out of the room. "Case dismissed," he muttered, moving on to the next matter as if slapping a teenager. In front of a packed courtroom was an everyday occurrence, but the world beyond those courtroom walls would soon learn otherwise. As the video gained traction, public outrage intensified. Viewers expressed horror and disbelief, demanding accountability for Judge Greaves's actions. Many wondered how such behavior could go unchecked within the justice system. For Layla and her family, however, the nightmare was far from over. It was only beginning. By late afternoon, the video of Judge Greaves slapping Layla had gone viral. Social media platforms were ablaze with reactions, and news outlets scrambled to cover the unfolding scandal. The footage, grainy but undeniable, showed every detail: the judge's raised hand, the sharp crack of the slap, and Layla's stunned expression as she stumbled back. Within hours, hashtags like "Justice for Layla," "Your Accountability Now," and "Judicial Reform" began trending not just locally, but across the country. People from all walks of life weighed in, expressing outrage, sympathy, and calls for action. Marcus Thompson was in the middle of a high-stakes meeting at the Department of Justice when his phone buzzed incessantly. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was routine updates from his assistant. But when one of his aides leaned over and whispered urgently, "Sir, you need to see this," Marcus excused himself and stepped into a private office. What he saw on his phone screen stopped him cold. The video played on loop, each replay hitting him harder than the last. His daughter's face, so bright and full of hope that morning, was now streaked with tears, her eyes wide with shock. The sound of the slap echoed in his ears, making his chest tighten with a mix of rage and helplessness. For a moment, Marcus simply stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. How could this happen? How could a judge, a person entrusted with upholding justice, commit such an act? As the initial wave of disbelief subsided, reality set in. Marcus realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about Layla anymore. It was about accountability, transparency, and the integrity of the judicial system itself. He knew that as the U.S. Attorney General, he couldn't afford to react impulsively. Still, the father in him burned with anger and protectiveness. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to take deep breaths before returning to the conference. From back home, Elena and Layla were overwhelmed by the flood of attention. Reporters camped outside their house, shouting questions and shoving microphones through the gates. Friends, family members, and even strangers called non-stop, offering support or asking for interviews. Layla, still shaken from the incident, retreated to her room, pulling the curtains shut and curling up on her bed. Elena tried to shield her as best she could, answering calls and turning away reporters while fielding messages from concerned loved ones. That evening, Marcus returned home, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. He hugged Layla tightly, holding her for several minutes without saying a word. When he finally pulled back, his eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of how deeply the incident had affected her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Layla nodded, though her voice trembled as she spoke. I didn't think something like this could happen. Not here. Not in a courtroom." Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "I know, sweetheart, and it shouldn't have. That's why we're going to make sure it never happens again." Later that night, Marcus addressed the nation in a televised statement. Sitting behind a podium emblazoned with the seal of the Department of Justice, he spoke with measured authority, his tone firm yet compassionate. "Today, my family experienced firsthand the pain and humiliation that can occur when those in positions of power abuse their authority," he began. "What happened to my daughter in that courtroom is unacceptable, not only as a father but as someone who has dedicated his life to serving justice." He went on to outline the steps the Department of Justice would take to investigate the incident thoroughly. "We will leave no stone unturned," he vowed. "This is not about politics or personal vendettas. It's about ensuring that our justice system operates with fairness, integrity, and respect for all individuals, regardless of age, race, or background." The speech resonated deeply with the public, earning praise from activists and lawmakers alike. Many viewed it as a powerful call to action, a reminder that even the highest-ranking officials are not immune to the flaws within the system they serve. Yet behind closed doors, Marcus wrestled with conflicting emotions. As much as he wanted to channel his anger into reform, he couldn't ignore the nagging doubts gnawing at him. Was Layla targeted because of her race? Did Judge Greaves assume she was just another defiant teenager unworthy of respect? Or had her father's prominent position somehow made her a target for harsh treatment? These questions haunted Marcus as he prepared for the investigation ahead. He knew that finding answers wouldn't be easy, especially given the layers of complexity involved. Meanwhile, Layla found herself thrust into the spotlight. News anchors referred to her as the brave teen fighting for justice, and social media users hailed her as a symbol of resilience. While some praised her courage, others criticized her decision to contest the ticket, accusing her of seeking attention or exaggerating the incident. Trolls flooded comment sections with hateful remarks, questioning everything from her character to her parenting. Elena did her best to shield Layla from the negativity, but it was impossible to escape entirely. One night, after scrolling through endless comments online, Layla broke down in tears. "Why are they attacking me?" she cried, clutching her phone tightly. "All I wanted was to tell my side of the story." Marcus sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Because people fear change," he said gently. "When someone stands up to injustice, it forces others to confront uncomfortable truths. Don't let their words define you, Layla. You stood up for yourself, and that takes strength." Despite the challenges, Layla began to find solace in the outpouring of support she received. Messages poured in from young people who shared similar experiences, stories of being dismissed, stereotyped, or mistreated by authority figures. Many thanked her for speaking out, saying her bravery inspired them to do the same. Slowly but surely, Layla started to see herself not just as a victim, but as part of a larger movement for change. As the days passed, investigators delved deeper into Judge Greaves's past. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. Court records revealed a pattern of behavior marked by impatience, bias, and disproportionate punishments handed down to minority defendants. In one case, a black defendant received the maximum sentence for a minor offense, while a white defendant charged with a similar crime walked away with probation. Another file showed that Greaves had once berated a Latina woman in open court, calling her disrespectful for questioning his ruling. These findings fueled public outrage even further. Protesters gathered outside courthouses nationwide, holding signs that read "No justice, no peace," and demanding systemic reforms. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing oversight of judges and implementing mandatory bias training for all judicial personnel. Activists argued that Judge Greaves's actions weren't isolated incidents but symptoms of a broader issue plaguing the justice system. For Marcus, the revelations served as both validation and vindication. They confirmed what he'd long suspected, that implicit biases often seeped into legal proceedings, affecting outcomes in ways that perpetuated inequality. Yet, he also recognized the enormity of the task ahead. Reforming an institution as entrenched as the judiciary wouldn't happen overnight. It would require persistence, collaboration, and unwavering commitment from everyone involved. Still, Marcus refused to lose sight of the bigger picture. Every challenge they faced, from the trolls targeting Layla to the resistance they encountered from entrenched powers, only strengthened his resolve. He reminded himself daily that true progress often came from pain, and sometimes personal tragedies could spark movements capable of transforming entire nations. As the investigation continued, Marcus kept a close watch on Layla, ensuring she had the support she needed to navigate the emotional toll of the ordeal. Together, they leaned on their faith, their family, and their shared belief in justice. Though the road ahead promised to be long and difficult, they faced it with determination, knowing that their fight wasn't just for themselves, it was for everyone who deserved to be treated with dignity and fairness under the law. The investigation into Judge Howard Greaves's conduct became one of the most high-profile cases in recent memory. Under immense public pressure, the Department of Justice moved swiftly to assemble a team of seasoned investigators, legal experts, and forensic analysts. Marcus Thompson, despite his personal connection to the case, insisted on maintaining strict impartiality throughout the process. He understood that any hint of favoritism or bias would undermine the credibility of the investigation, and he couldn't afford that. This wasn't just about justice for Layla. It was about restoring trust in the judicial system itself. The investigative team began by reviewing every piece of evidence available, starting with the courtroom footage that had gone viral. They examined it frame by frame, noting not only the slap but also Judge Greaves's body language, tone, and interactions with others in the room. The video painted a damning picture, a man who seemed impatient, dismissive, and ultimately violent when challenged. But the investigators knew they needed more than just one incident to build a comprehensive case against him. So, they dug deeper. Court records were their next target. Over the years, Judge Greaves had presided over hundreds of cases, leaving behind a trail of rulings, decisions, and documented exchanges. What the investigators found was alarming. Patterns emerged, patterns that suggested systemic prejudice. For example, defendants from minority communities consistently received harsher sentences than their white counterparts for similar offenses. In one particularly egregious case, a young black man was sentenced to 6 months in jail for possession of a small amount of marijuana, while a white defendant charged with the same offense walked away with community service. These disparities weren't isolated incidents. They formed part of a broader trend that raised serious questions about Judge Greaves's impartiality. Investigators also uncovered instances where he openly mocked or belittled minority defendants during hearings, using language that many considered demeaning and dehumanizing. One transcript showed him telling a Latina woman, "Maybe if I spent less time arguing and more time obeying the law, we wouldn't be here." Such comments, though subtle, revealed a troubling lack of empathy and professionalism. As the investigation progressed, witnesses came forward to share their experiences. Some were former defendants who had appeared before Judge Greaves, while others were court staff members who had worked closely with him. A clerk recounted how Greaves often complained about certain types of people clogging up his docket, referring specifically to low-income individuals and minorities. Another witness described overhearing him make derogatory remarks about civil rights attorneys, calling them troublemakers, who wasted the court's time. Each new piece of evidence added fuel to the firestorm surrounding the case. Public outrage reached fever pitch as news outlets reported these findings, prompting calls for immediate action. Protesters gathered outside courthouses nationwide, holding signs that read, "Bias has no place in justice," and reform now. Lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at increasing diversity among judges and implementing stricter oversight mechanisms to prevent abuses of power. Activists argued that Judge Greaves's behavior wasn't an anomaly. It was symptomatic of a larger problem within the judiciary. Amidst all this, Marcus faced mounting pressure to step aside from overseeing the investigation. Critics accused him of having a conflict of interest, given that the victim was his daughter. While Marcus acknowledged the concerns, he refused to recuse himself entirely. Instead, he delegated day-to-day responsibilities to trusted colleagues, while remaining involved in key decisions. He believed it was his duty, not just as a father but as the U.S. Attorney General, to ensure that the investigation remained thorough, transparent, and fair. One evening, after another long day of meetings and briefings, Marcus sat alone in his study, staring at the stack of files on his desk. His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Convicting a sitting judge of misconduct was no small feat, especially someone as entrenched in the system as Greaves. Yet Marcus knew that failing to hold him accountable would send a dangerous message, that those in power could act with impunity. Determined to see the matter through, Marcus decided to confront Judge Greaves directly. It wasn't something he took lightly. Private hearings between top officials and accused parties were rare and fraught with potential pitfalls. But Marcus felt it was necessary. He wanted answers, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by someone like Greaves. The meeting took place in a secure conference room at the Department of Justice headquarters. Judge Greaves arrived flanked by his lawyers, his usual arrogance replaced by a tense defensiveness. Dressed in a dark suit, he looked every bit the image of a man fighting to salvage his reputation. As he sat down across from Marcus, there was a palpable tension in the air. "Judge Greaves," Marcus began, his voice steady and authoritative, "you've been accused of gross misconduct, including physical assault and systemic bias. I want to give you the opportunity to explain yourself." Greaves shifted uncomfortably in his seat but quickly composed himself. "Mr. Attorney General," he replied, choosing his words carefully, "what happened in that courtroom was regrettable. A momentary lapse in judgment, but I assure you it was never my intention to harm anyone." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze fixed on Greaves. "A momentary lapse? You slapped a teenage girl in open court, Judge. That's not a lapse. That's an abuse of power." Greaves hesitated, clearly struggling to defend his actions. "I admit I lost my temper, but let's not forget she was being disrespectful." "Disrespectful," Marcus interrupted sharply, his calm demeanor giving way to barely contained anger. She was exercising her right to present her case. And even if she hadn't been, nothing excuses what you did. Do you understand the responsibility you carry as a judge? You're supposed to uphold the law, not break it. For the first time, Greaves looked genuinely shaken. His lawyers exchanged nervous glances, sensing that their client was losing ground. Still, Greaves pressed on. "Look, Mr. Thompson, I didn't know who she was. If I had known she was your daughter, I never would have." "That's exactly the problem." Marcus cut him off again, his voice rising slightly. "You treated her the way you did because you saw her as just another black teenager, someone unworthy of respect. Isn't that right?" Greaves opened his mouth to respond but stopped short. The truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable and suffocating. Marcus continued, his tone softer now but no less firm. "This isn't just about Layla. It's about every person who has ever walked into a courtroom hoping for fairness, only to be met with prejudice and contempt. You betrayed them, Judge. You betrayed the very principles this system is built on." The room fell silent as Marcus's words sank in. Greaves slumped back in his chair, defeated. For the first time, he seemed to grasp the magnitude of his actions, not just the slap itself, but the years of bias and injustice that had led to this moment. Though he tried to argue that his behavior was an isolated incident, the evidence told a different story. When the hearing concluded, Marcus stepped out into the hallway, feeling both drained and resolute. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Holding someone like Greaves accountable would require navigating political minefields, and overcoming resistance from powerful allies. But Marcus was determined to see it through, not just for Layla, but for everyone who deserved better from the justice system. As he walked back to his office, Marcus reflected on the weight of his role. Being the U.S. Attorney General wasn't just about enforcing laws, it was about setting an example. Every decision he made, every action he took, sent a message about what kind of society they wanted to live in. And Marcus knew that true change started with accountability, even when it meant confronting uncomfortable truths. The days following Marcus Thompson's private confrontation with Judge Howard Greaves marked a turning point in the case. The weight of the evidence against Greaves was undeniable, and public pressure continued to mount. Yet as Marcus prepared for the final stages of accountability, he couldn't help but reflect on the broader implications of the scandal. This wasn't just about punishing one man. It was about dismantling the systemic flaws that allowed such behavior to persist in the first place. Greaves, stripped of his judicial robes and barred from presiding over any cases pending the outcome of the investigation, had retreated into a defensive silence. His legal team scrambled to mitigate the damage, issuing statements claiming that Greaves's actions were out of character and the result of stress and burnout. But these attempts at damage control fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence. Leaked transcripts, witness testimonies, and statistical analyses painted a damning portrait of a man who had abused his power for years. Meanwhile, Layla found herself at the center of a national conversation about race, justice, and reform. She became a reluctant symbol of resilience, her story inspiring countless others to share their own experiences of bias within the legal system. Social media platforms buzzed with stories of people who had been mistreated by judges, law enforcement officers, and other authority figures. Hashtags like #MyJusticeStory and Break the Bias trended alongside Justice for Layla, creating a groundswell of support for systemic change. Despite the outpouring of solidarity, Layla still grappled with the emotional toll of the incident. Nights were particularly difficult. She often lay awake replaying the moment when Judge Greaves's hand struck her face. Her parents tried to shield her from the worst of the online vitriol, but some comments slipped through, hateful messages accusing her of exaggerating the situation or seeking fame. It hurt, but Layla refused to let those voices define her. With each passing day, she grew more determined to turn her pain into purpose. Marcus encouraged this shift in perspective, reminding Layla that her voice mattered now more than ever. "You have a platform," he told her one evening as they sat together in the living room. "Use it wisely. Speak for those who can't speak for themselves." Inspired by her father's words, Layla agreed to participate in a televised interview. Sitting across from a seasoned journalist, she spoke candidly about the incident and its aftermath. Her poise and eloquence captivated viewers, many of whom praised her courage and maturity. When asked how she felt about the growing movement sparked by her case, Layla smiled softly. "I never wanted this to happen to me," she admitted. "But if my experience can help make things better for someone else, then maybe it's worth it." Her words resonated deeply, further galvanizing calls for reform. Lawmakers introduced sweeping legislation aimed at addressing racial bias in the judiciary, including mandatory diversity training for judges, increased transparency in court proceedings, and the establishment of independent oversight committees to review complaints against judicial officials. Activists hailed these measures as long overdue steps toward equity, though they acknowledged that real change would require sustained effort. As momentum built, Marcus focused on ensuring that Judge Greaves faced appropriate consequences for his actions. After weeks of deliberation, the investigative panel concluded that Greaves had engaged in conduct unbecoming of a judge and recommended his permanent removal from the bench. Additionally, prosecutors filed criminal charges against him for assault, marking a rare instance of legal accountability for misconduct within the judiciary. The trial that followed drew widespread attention. Courtrooms overflowed with spectators and news crews set up camp outside the building, broadcasting live updates around the clock. For Marcus, attending the proceedings was both emotionally taxing and professionally necessary. He wanted to be present, not just as a father seeking justice for his daughter, but as a representative of the Department of Justice committed to upholding the rule of law. During the trial, witnesses recounted harrowing tales of Greaves's behavior. One woman described how he mocked her accent during a custody hearing, dismissing her concerns as irrelevant. Another testified that he sentenced her son, a first-time offender, to an excessive term in juvenile detention after refusing to hear mitigating evidence. Each account added depth to the prosecution's case, painting Greaves not as an isolated bad actor, but as part of a pattern of institutional failure. In his defense, Greaves claimed ignorance and remorse, arguing that his actions were unintentional and driven by frustration rather than malice. His lawyers emphasized his decades of service and contributions to the legal community, urging leniency. But the jury remained unmoved. After days of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict, convicting Greaves of misdemeanor assault and official misconduct. The sentencing phase brought a mix of emotions. Many hoped for a harsh punishment that would send a clear message about accountability. In the end, Greaves received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a lifetime ban from holding any judicial office. While some viewed the sentence as insufficient given the severity of his actions, others saw it as a significant step forward, a precedent-setting moment in the fight for judicial integrity. For Marcus, the outcome was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt relief knowing that Greaves would no longer wield the gavel. On the other hand, he recognized that true justice extended beyond punishing one individual. It required addressing the root causes of bias and inequality within the system itself. As he stood before reporters after the verdict, Marcus reiterated his commitment to reform. "This is not the end," he declared. "It's the beginning of a larger conversation about fairness, dignity, and respect in our courts. We owe it to every person who walks through those doors to ensure they are treated equally under the law." Back home, the Thompson family began to heal. Layla channeled her energy into activism, joining organizations dedicated to promoting civil rights and advocating for marginalized communities. Elena supported her wholeheartedly, organizing fundraisers and awareness campaigns to amplify Layla's message. And Marcus, though burdened by the complexities of his role, found renewed purpose in championing policies that prioritized equity and accountability. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, the Thompsons emerged stronger, united, by their shared mission to create a better future. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also understood that progress often came from pain. For Marcus, Layla, and millions of others watching closely, the slap heard round the IEA world had ignited a movement, one capable of transforming not just a single courtroom but an entire nation. In the months that followed Judge Howard Greaves's conviction, the ripple effects of the scandal continued to reshape the American justice system. What had started as a single incident, a slap in a courtroom, had grown into a national reckoning, sparking conversations about accountability, bias, and reform at every level of society. For Marcus Thompson and his family, life slowly began returning to a semblance of normalcy, though nothing would ever be quite the same again. Layla, once hesitant to step into the spotlight, had transformed into an advocate with a voice that resonated far beyond her years. She traveled across the country, speaking at schools, community centers, and rallies about the importance of standing up for justice, even when it felt overwhelming or impossible. Her speeches were filled with raw honesty, weaving together personal anecdotes with calls to action. "I didn't ask for this," she often said, pausing to let her words sink in. "But if sharing my story can help someone else feel less alone, then I'll keep telling it." Her activism inspired countless young people to speak out against injustice, whether it was racial profiling, unfair sentencing, or everyday discrimination. Social media became a tool for connection, with teenagers creating hashtags like Young Voices for Change and organizing virtual discussions about how to dismantle systemic inequities. Layla's courage gave others permission to find their own strength, proving that even ordinary individuals could spark extraordinary movements. Meanwhile, Marcus used his position as U.S. Attorney General to push for sweeping reforms within the judiciary. He spearheaded initiatives aimed at increasing diversity among judges, ensuring that benches reflected the communities they served. Recognizing that representation mattered, he worked tirelessly to create pipelines for underrepresented groups to enter legal professions, partnering with universities, nonprofits, and bar associations to provide scholarships, mentorship programs, and career support. One of his most ambitious efforts involved establishing independent oversight committees, tasked with reviewing complaints against judicial officials. These panels, composed of legal experts, community leaders, and citizens, operated transparently, publishing annual reports on their findings and recommendations. Critics argued that such measures might infringe upon judicial independence, but Marcus countered by emphasizing the need for balance. Accountability doesn't undermine authority, he explained during a press conference. It strengthens it. A judge who is fair and impartial has nothing to fear from scrutiny. Reforms didn't stop there. Marcus also championed legislation requiring mandatory implicit bias training for all judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officers. The training modules, developed in collaboration with psychologists and civil rights organizations, focused not just on recognizing bias but on actively combating it. Participants learned strategies for fostering empathy, challenging stereotypes, and making decisions rooted in fairness rather than prejudice. Though progress was slow, early signs suggested that these changes were having an impact. Reports of misconduct decreased and public trust in the judiciary began inching upward. Still, Marcus knew that real transformation required sustained effort over generations. It wasn't enough to implement new policies. Attitudes needed to shift as well. That meant engaging with communities directly, listening to their concerns, and addressing grievances head-on. Elena played a crucial role in this process, using her background in education to organize workshops and seminars for parents, teachers, and students. Together, she and Layla led discussions about how to navigate interactions with authority figures, empowering young people to assert their rights while staying safe. Their message was clear: knowledge was power, and preparation could make all the difference in moments of crisis. As the family adjusted to their new roles, they found solace in each other's company. Sunday dinners became sacred rituals, where laughter mingled with serious conversations about the work still ahead. Marcus often joked that he'd never imagined raising two activists when he married Elena, but beneath his humor lay deep pride. His daughter had turned pain into purpose, inspiring countless others along the way. For Layla, the journey wasn't without challenges. There were days when the weight of her advocacy felt heavy, when trolls online tried to drag her down, or when memories of the courtroom surfaced unexpectedly. But she reminded herself why she kept going, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved better. Each small victory fueled her determination, whether it was seeing a new policy implemented or hearing from someone whose life had been touched by her story. By the one-year anniversary of the incident, the Thompsons stood side by side at a massive rally for judicial reform in Washington, D.C. Thousands of people gathered holding signs and chanting slogans like "Fair courts for all" and "Justice without bias." As Marcus took the stage to address the crowd, Layla watched proudly from the sidelines, marveling at how far they'd come. "We've made strides," Marcus began, his voice steady yet impassioned. "But our work is far from finished. Justice isn't something we achieve overnight. It's something we build day by day, decision by decision. And it starts with each of us committing to do better." When he finished speaking, Layla joined him on stage, gripping his hand tightly. Cameras flashed as father and daughter faced the cheering crowd together, a symbol of resilience and hope. In that moment, it was clear that their fight wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about building a future where everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, could walk into a courtroom, or any space, and expect fairness. As the rally dispersed and the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus wrapped an arm around Layla's shoulders. "You know," he said softly, "you're going to change the world." She smiled, leaning into him. "We already are, Dad. Together. And So the Thompsons pressed onward, driven by love, faith, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of change. Their story served as a reminder that even in the face of injustice, courage and perseverance could spark movements capable of transforming nations. From a quiet morning at home to a nationwide awakening, their journey proved that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance could lead to the biggest victories, for themselves, for their community, and for generations to come.